First of all, I didn't do science at school. No science at all except for biology, and of course I did O-level maths. After A-levels, I was wondering what to do. I decided to teach because I left school pretty young. So I was teaching, trying to decide what to do. And at the same time, I'm what you call a old man child. So my father had retired when I was quite young. So he was a lawyer, he was a magistrate and a puisne judge and so on. So he was at home and working at home and mainly what you call conveyancing and doing things like agreements and wills and those kinds of things. But conveyancing, of course, involves deeds mainly for property. So I was working with him because he'd asked me to do things for him. And then I left one teaching job because the guy he had owed me some month's salary he wasn't paying. So my father said, well, what was the point? So I really didn't know what to do. And one day my mother said, but son, why don't you become an engineer like your brother? Because I love to fix things. I'd fix the bicycle. I'd fix anything at home. I remember we had one of those big clocks called a grandfather clock. And it stopped working. And I fixed the clock. And my mother was, she was so impressed. It wasn't funny. But it was easy because those grandfather clocks, there was a spring that you would wind. They use the term in Trinidad, you chain the clock. Well, you really would wind up that spring. And that spring was so designed that when it released, it would release in synchronism, of course, with the time. It was so designed so that you'd have to wind it up again because when it became too slack, the time would slow down. So what had happened, the anchor of this power spring inside there had come loose from the wood inside there. So all I did is re-anchored it and replaced it, fitted it back properly. I sort of looked at another clock. We had two that was working well, and I said, that's what seemed to have happened. So anyway, I went to court a couple of times with my father to see what this thing was like because I thought of maybe becoming a lawyer or something. I even started to study a little bit. And then I decided, this is not for me. So I said, well, let me try this engineering thing. So I applied to the university to do engineering. And lo and behold, I was accepted. But obviously, I didn't have the maths or the physics or the chemistry. I never did that at all. So they accepted me to something called N1. So I said, fine, it's pre-engineering. So I'd go to. And I went to N1 and I tell you, I don't want to give you the story when I first went to N1 because I couldn't believe that this is what they wanted me to do in a year. Obviously, I couldn't do it. So I backed off. But then I decided, listen, you have to try this thing. So I went back and did 2 years of natural sciences and then came to engineering. By that time, I was determined, listen, I will continue this thing. So, and I'm glad because as I became older, there were no sort of career guidance in the schools really. So over time I realized, well, this is really probably the best thing that I could do because I like more outdoor things. I like to see things built. I like to build things, those kinds of things. I like to do things. So certainly the law would not have been, although I can speak well, I can argue well, I don't think it would have been for me. So that, if you like, is how I became an engineer. Because I like to work with things, the easiest thing to work on as I got older were cars. There weren't many other engines that one could work on really. I grew up in the country, so cars were. So I got to like cars a bit. And one of my early experiences was working in Nilamasi in the assembly plant. It was interesting, but then I got a call from Kariri because I had done my final year project on the pan, and both the forming of the pan and checking the notes of the pan, what constituted the notes. There was a guy called Ron Dennis was a lecturer in mechanical engineering. He was very innovative, probably the first person who started research on pan. And actually, Patty worked with him for a while. Patty was supposed to do his PhD in the area, Mike Patty, and started it, but for some reason didn't continue. Also, Peter Beckles had also started some work with him, started some good mathematical work with him. Anyway, I'd done my final year project on the pan, and I'd worked a summer with Ron Dennis on the pan. First, as I say, looking at the forming of it, using hydroforming, a small 12-inch press that we had in the lab there, that we designed a punch and die, what is called a soft die, because we're making it out of one side was a rubber diaphragm, and the other side we made it with concrete epoxy, strong concrete. Anyway, I got a call from Kariri to work there on a pan project because Richard McDavid was the head of the materials section. He had done some lecturing for us in part 3, strength of materials, with the same Ron Dennis. Ron Dennis was about to leave, so he sort of took over, and he left before the end of the year. So he sort of took over to help us with our tutorials and any problems we had. Because he had been working with Ron Dennis, I think, as a grad student also. So he said, well, listen, there's this project on the pan in Kariri. I mean, you know about this thing, why don't you come and work with us on it? I said, fantastic. It wasn't so much because it was a pan at that time. It was fantastic because I live in San Grande. I'm going to put Spain as a mess, as it is now. Over the years, it has eased up and then become a mess again and so on. So coming to St. Augustine was a breeze. So and I was a customer at St. Augustine and come to university here. I like the place. So I decided to listen, I'll go for this job. So I went for that job in Kariri. And I spent a little over 6 years in Kariri. And it was really a wonderful, wonderful experience. I got a lot of experience. Kariri sent me on several training programs, including through Kariri, I got a UN fellowship to do my master's degree in England. I worked on several very, very interesting projects. One of them, in fact, was the Centrin, the steel mill that Jack Ramatharsingh built. As a matter of fact, we worked, Richard McDavid and myself, on a lot of the operations that Jack Ramatharsingh started, because his family had his father, Daniel, and that's why he called his thing Dan Steel, had something as hardware in Marabella. And they had something called the back store. It was a place where they were building things. They started building wheelbarrows and things like that you could build pretty easily to sell any hardware. But he had a bigger vision for steel. And he started a company called Trinrico, which still exists. They make nails and what we call BRC in Trinidad, which is really welded wire mesh. They corrugate galvanized sheet and so on, and do those kinds of things. So we in fact helped him establish Trinrico. And it was very interesting because I worked with an engineer from Puerto Rico, and we in fact commissioned the plant in Trinrico and stayed with him for a while, making sure the quality was right and so on. So we were kind of long-term consultants in a sense for Ramatharsingh, because after Trinrico, he wanted to build this steel plant. He had his visions. And of course, there were some promises that were made by Scott at the time, which I don't think were fulfilled as well as they should have been. I think Jack, in many cases, didn't have the kind of luck that he should have had, because he was a very, very entrepreneurial person. He was very interested in driving the steel industry in Trinidad and Tobago. So anyway, that was very, very interesting early experiences, commissioning the plant in Trinrico and doing the feasibility study for him. And he sent us to various parts of the world, any equipment he wanted to buy. So we were in the United States, in Ohio, in Miami, other places looking at things. We went on a European tour to look at equipment that he wanted to buy and to talk to potential partners in the steel business. He wanted Richard or myself or both of us to come and work, maybe take time off from Kariri or leave Kariri, come and work and establish the steel plant. And I think that would have been a fascinating experience to do. But by the time that time reached, 1980, my wife had just started university here, and she's working in town. She's started part-time. We're living in St. Raleigh. She's working in town. It would have been extremely difficult for me now to work in Point Lisa establishing a plant, because I'd have been working 24 hours a day. So I had to tell Jack, I'll give you all the help you want, but I cannot come. So some of I think the outstanding achievements would be my work in continuing engineering education at UB here. This is something that was started in the 70s by Dr. Myron Chin, and he is really the pioneer in this area. And he continued with that for many years, over a dozen years, in the faculty. And we were fortunate that when the International Association for Continuing Engineering Education was established, Dr. Chin, who had been working with a UNESCO group, he got a seat on the World Council for the Caribbean through what was called the CCU, the Council of Caribbean Engineering Organizations. So I took over from Dr. Chin somewhere in the middle 80s, and I would say that took the foundation that he built and really expanded it tremendously, so that we went from just a few courses a year, because this was something that was relatively new to engineers in Trinidad and Tobago, and really expanded it in a number of years to where we were doing over 50 continuing education courses, whether they were conferences or seminars or short courses or what have you, a year. Having established that further plateau, that sort of quantum leap, if I may call it that, in the area of continuing engineering education, I had to go on leave. It was a sort of mini sabbatical, and somebody else had to take over to run that center, the Continuing Engineering Education Center. One of the things that came out of the efforts of the Continuing Engineering Education Center was the establishment of the Engineering Institute. And with Trevor Bupsing, who was a lecturer in petroleum engineering and had always advocated a closer relationship with industry. Trevor Bupsing, the deputy dean at the time, Professor Kocha, who was very supportive, and also the dean at the time, Professor Magor. The four of us sort of got together to establish this engineering institute, which is an institute that is supposed to act as the interface between the university and industry, both for continuing engineering education as well as for projects of mainly interdisciplinary nature. There's some other things that I think can stand out. One of them is not at UE, but it relates to my work as an academic, and that's the establishment of UTT. In the establishment of UTT, I was first asked by the then Minister of Tertiary Education, well, Science, Technology and Tertiary Education, Mr. Montano. He had asked me to serve on a large committee, a steering committee of about 24 people, headed by Professor Julian, to establish the University of Trinidad and Tobago. That committee lasted for about a year, and I presume because of the work that I did on the several committees, Professor Julian asked me to join a very select committee, a small committee of about 5 of us, to really implement the accepted recommendations of that steering committee. So that I worked very closely with Professor Julian in the establishment of UTT. And one could say, I can say without contradiction, that I was sort of a main assistant to Professor Julian in setting up the UTT. I was able to help with various aspects of the establishment of UTT, including the development of two master's programs, one in entrepreneurship, another one in oil and gas. The ones in oil and gas, of course, both these were worked on by other people who had specific expertise in the area, like in the oil and gas master's degree, which is done in collaboration with Repsol, the technical institute, higher level technical institute at Repsol in Spain, just outside Madrid, and here at What University. They combined to do an international oil and gas master's degree, which we established, and UTT took part in it for a while. Also, what is going strong is that master's degree in entrepreneurship. It has a longer name, but entrepreneurship is the short name that I would use. That was done in collaboration with the University of Cambridge, and I was pleased that the person who was chosen to head that was one of my earliest students in industrial engineering, Professor Denise Thompson. Another, I would say, outstanding achievement is the policy, the development of a policy for tertiary education, TVET, that's technical and vocational education and training, and lifelong learning. Developing a policy for the government. That started in the last regime. So that started way back in 2008, I believe. And we finished it. And I'm pleased to say that it was adopted by the present government, the change in regime, with some modifications, of course. The present government, they have their own vision and their 7 pillars. So policy was based on that eventually, but it was essentially the policy that we developed. I say we developed because, of course, all these policies are developed by consultation and by committees. But in the end, I had to write it with tremendous assistance, of course, from one particular young lady from the Ministry of Science, Technology and Tertiary Education. And without her help and her inspiration, I have said before, I wouldn't have been able to complete it in time. So, as I say, it was very pleasing that this policy was done in a previous political regime. It was accepted by the following political regime with some modifications. And I was involved in the actual development of it through the different stages to the state where it's a white paper. I should mention that policy built on some very, very good work done by a guy called Eduardo Ali, who in fact had been a consultant at the Ministry of Science, Technology and Tertiary Education. And one must acknowledge his tremendous efforts. Again, in the foundation that he built, that we developed on. Yes, this young lady I was talking about from the Ministry of Science, Technology and Tertiary Education, Natoya Batiste. She was of, as I said, tremendous help in the final preparation of the policy document. I've suffered, I think, many injustices. However, life has been good. I think everybody in life has suffered injustices. I have had good health, a wonderful wife. Everybody thinks I'm married to someone for her looks. But she was just a little skinny kid when I saw her growing up, and we were great friends. She's a natural. She's a natural in sport. Any sport she took up, she used to play good and so on. She used to play hockey, international wrestling guild, when they used to beat everybody and all kind of thing. But just didn't pursue those things. I don't know why. So she got the confidence now, and people would tell her, hey, come and do this for us, and blah, blah, blah. I was mentioning I've been lucky. My health has been good up to now. A wonderful wife, I would say. I've enjoyed my I always enjoyed wherever I do. I have been given the latitude to do things, to work with APETT. They don't harass me here. They want to do my work with the fraternity. All kinds of things all over the place for NGOs and things. Never thought of money, but money came. Simple fellow. So, regrets in a sense, probably the only regret is that I didn't have the courage to become a writer. I feel that I make real good. But I could probably still make. If I have enough years. Like, you know what I mean? I had two people in Trinidad and Tobago who were my mentors, and they were two of the greatest engineers that passed through Trinidad and Tobago, and two of the greatest men. That was Fenwick Defoe and Alvin Likwai, were two of my mentors throughout my engineering career. And maybe that is why I specialize in inspection, because Alvin Likwai was a man who taught me a lot about inspection. While I was at Korea, just when I went to Korea, Robin Osborne, who was in charge of the concrete lab, went on his training. I went a few years after. And Richard McDavid and myself were the only two engineers there. And Richard told me, he said, listen, Clem, you interested in the concrete lab? I don't have too much interest in that. One of us has to be in charge. Well, I said, fine, I will sign off the things. In deciding to sign off the things, I told myself, well, boy, my brother is a concrete expert, so no problem. I have Dr. Halverson here, who has been sent to help us with that thing. He's very good, so no problem. But so I went to my brother and I said, listen, Prof, they asked me to be in charge of the concrete lab, but me not more concrete. I mean, I could mix concrete since I was small. I doing all kind of things. I like doing things. I mix concrete with all kind of people. I know how to mix 4-1 or whatever. He said, no. This is no 4-1 business. But the potential of the concrete lab, read. You're an engineer. I said, read what? He said, there's a book called Neville. Go and read it. So I said, okay. So I went and I read Neville. Me and my brother are different people. We used to fight a lot. But he was a good man and he was a great contributor. And he had a fantastic brain. I mean, oh Lord, very few people have met with that kind of brain. So Julian and him, I think, Phelps in his way, and there are many other people. But those two fellas, as I said, they were my mentors, so I may be biased. But Defoe, integrity, willingness to help everybody, his regard for the profession, his technical ability, he's going out on his own as an entrepreneur. That's what I think a lot of engineers should do. I never did it because I really found joy here after a while. Likwai, same thing. The same attributes I just told you. I mean, Likwai wasn't as smooth as Defoe. Likwai would rough you up, but with pure love. Yeah. He rough you up, you're doing some foolishness. I mean, he rough you up.